All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are so excited to have just about over 100 people join us this evening. Good evening. This is the RHS School Counseling Department, and we are so excited to have you here and to do this live YouTube event. This is our first time going live on YouTube, and so we're all looking forward to it, but a little nervous, so bear with us with any technical glitches that we might experience, but we're prepared for a really smooth and successful evening. We hope that you're together as a family and that you have a cup of tea, some hot cocoa, and that tonight is just really informative for you and you feel supported and get some answers to some of your questions. So to introduce the team here, my name is Stephanie Smith. I'm the Director of School Counseling, and I'm lucky enough to get to work with the ladies that you see on the screen here every day. We have Mrs. Jackie Trainer, Mrs. Sydney McGivney, Ms. Marguerite Cahill, Ms. Kimmy Sweet, Ms. Ryan Hughes, Ms. Rebecca Muirview, and Ms. Peggy Wu. And we would not be here tonight if it wasn't for the screen that you see there, Alex Blinder, Mr. Blinder, Eddie Lara, Kristen Fox, the tech team that got us up and running this evening. We're thankful for your support and making this possible. So tonight is our junior planning event for post-secondary preparedness. And so we have received some questions ahead of time through our email address. And the way that tonight works is that if you have any questions, you are free to submit them. We are here to answer them live. We'll be moderating at the same time and answering your questions. So to submit a question, you send them to the email address juniorplanning@bernardsboe.com. So again, that's juniorplanning@bernardsboe.com. We'll remind folks of that email address over the next few minutes as we know people are logging on and joining us. We did receive some questions ahead of time over the past couple of days, and so we've compiled those questions and prepared some answers. So we'll do a mix of giving you some of our prepared answers to your questions ahead of time, and then obviously taking some questions live. Without any further ado, I think that I will turn it over to Mrs. Trainer, where she will describe some of the topics that we'll cover tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. I am really excited to be co-hosting this event, co-facilitating it. So some of the topics that we're going to cover tonight include mental health wellness, post-secondary pathways, standardized testing, Naviance, financial aid, and many other topics. So there's going to be a lot of information shared tonight. And I think our biggest takeaway that we hope you leave here tonight with is that we are here to help you. We all have the same goal in mind, and that is to support your student and you throughout this whole process. So if you missed some information tonight and you need to reference the Q&A document, please do that, but also please reach out to us if you need any support. So with that being said, I'm going to start off with the first question of the evening, which relates to mental health and wellness. So our question is, starting this process feels overwhelming, exciting, and stressful. What support is available to help my student? So just to begin, obviously we are in a time, both in our world, where it's already very stressful. So for junior students and parents, when you add in post-secondary planning, that just increases the stress level. And it's normal to feel stressed when you encounter something new, but also something unfamiliar. So our hope is that we encourage our students to take time for self-care. So what does that look like for students when we talk about self-care? We're talking about getting enough sleep, proper nutrition, exercising, making time for hobbies, or maybe exploring some new interest, connecting with friends and family, gratitude journaling, and mindfulness. Also, one thing that I think we all could work on, including myself, is to unplug from technology. We are spending a lot of time on our devices and in front of our computers and our phones and our screens, and I think it's really important that we disconnect. It's not easy, but it is something that we all kind of have to strive to accomplish. But again, even with all of that, if your student is struggling with any emotions or feelings regarding this process, they are not alone. Their counselor and our student assistance counselors are available for help. So please encourage them to reach out. I also want to take a moment to talk a little bit about a program that was introduced this month from our student assistance counselors called our Wellness Wednesdays. It's a new program designed to incorporate more wellness practices and opportunities for self-care. So these workshops are approximately 20 minutes in duration. They will be covering topics like meditation, grounding techniques. Students can access information from their counselor's Google Classroom, or they can contact a student assistance counselor. So mental health and wellness is something that's very important. Again, please reach out if you need any support during this time. That brings us to our next question, which Mrs. Hughes is going to answer for us. The question is, this is our first time thinking about post-secondary planning. Are we behind in this process?
All right, so if this is the first time that you are hearing about this, I know a lot of people have questions about that. So the goal of our presentation is just to introduce everyone to the options that you have and begin the conversation about what's going to be coming up in the next 18 months or so. So we know that this is a lot of information coming at you guys tonight and in the last couple of weeks. And wherever you are in the process is totally fine. And it's the right place for you to be. So if this is the first time you're thinking about planning for after high school, or you've been thinking about it for your entire life, wherever you are right now is the perfect place for you to be. So this is kind of, us letting you know that we are here to support you through the process, to navigate it however it works for you. And in our junior post-secondary planning packet, which was posted in Google Classroom and on the Ridge website, we do provide you guys with an approximate timeline calendar image that you can utilize to help guide you through the process. So you are not behind, even if this is the first time you are thinking about it, you are definitely on track.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hughes. So speaking of the potential pathways that are ahead of us, Ms. Mirabue, what are some of the available options for students after graduation?
So every student is on their own path, and there isn't one right path for one student, and it's not always going to be a perfect path. And so we want to just make sure that our students know that we're here to help support them as they explore different options that they may have after they graduate from Ridge. These options can include attending a 2-year college after Ridge High School or going on to a 4-year school. For some students, they may take a gap year. So they may take a year after high school. They might defer their college acceptance or maybe not have applied at all and take a year to volunteer or travel or even do an internship or a job. There is also technical and vocational training programs that some of our students will go to after they graduate from Ridge, as well as different paths into military service, as well as into the job force, so into employment. So in the junior post-secondary packet, the counseling department has detailed all of these pathways with a variety of resources, and we will be meeting individually with every student later in the second semester to discuss what path is best for each student on an individual basis.
Thank you, that's so helpful. Our next question also kind of continues on the post-secondary pathways. So Ms. McGivney, what can my child learn more about careers and majors? They aren't sure what they want to major in yet.
This is a really good question. And it is totally normal to feel that way. Your career journey is long and winding, and this is kind of the first place you're going to start. That journey. So Naviance is going to become your best friend throughout the next 18 months, and it has some really great career inventories that you can take. If you remember, when we came into the classroom last January, we went through one of these inventories with you, and there are several more you can take. You can find them in the About Me section of Naviance. Some career inventories connect career clusters with college majors, so that might help if you're not sure exactly what you want to study in college also. And there's also information in the handbook about crafting resumes and cover letters, and there's some interview skill tips for students who are seeking employment after high school.
All right, thank you. Definitely a lot of information so far about the various pathways. So let's zoom in a bit specifically about those who are interested in applying to college. And Ms. Mirabue, I'll toss the mic back to you. And can you talk to us a bit about a question we received? And a few people asked this question in a couple different ways, but essentially, how do colleges evaluate an applicant, and how can students differentiate themselves from one another?
That's a great question. There's a lot of different parts to the college application, and students have been working towards each of those parts since they entered high school as freshmen. Colleges are essentially going to ask 3 questions when they review a student's file. The first question is, can the student do the work at this particular college that they're applying to? And the most important answer to that question is going to be the student's transcript. So a student's transcript is going to be a record of the classes that the student has taken and the grades that they've earned. But that transcript is not looked at in isolation. So the colleges are going to look at that transcript in the context of Ridge High School. Students from Ridge are not compared to students from other high schools. Students from Ridge are compared to each other with regards to what classes does Ridge High School offer and what courses has a student chosen to take in terms of how they're challenging themselves. So an important thing to note is that challenge is not one size fit all. So not everyone is going to challenge themselves in the same way in terms of taking advantage of Ridge's curriculum. For some students, challenge might be taking honors and AP classes in the courses and disciplines that are appropriate, where they may have strengths or interests. For other students, they may challenge themselves by taking 4 years of a world language when the requirement is only 2. Or perhaps they've exhausted our business electives when they've surpassed the requirements of taking 5 credits. For some students, maybe they're taking advanced art. Maybe they're taking double coursework in one academic area. So challenge is not one size fits all, and not every college is looking for the same level of challenge or rigor in an applicant's file. So the second thing to note is when a college looks at the student's transcript, they're also going to pay attention to trends. So where does the student start as a freshman and where do they go from there? So what kind of GPA trends are they showing? And then what kind of trends are they showing in terms of their academic coursework and elective work? So it's important to know that entire context is what's evaluated when the colleges want to know, can this student do the work? Have they taken the courses and earned the grades that we feel they would need to be successful here? And so the students who graduate every year are evaluated based on the performance of the students from Ridge High School who've gone on before them. So the colleges actually track how students do at their campus freshman year based on the courses and grades they've earned in high school. And that helps give colleges an indicator, should we be tightening up our criteria when we're evaluating a student from a certain high school? Or maybe we can go deeper into that pool because those students have proven on campus when they're taking our first year courses that they're very well prepared. And so it's important to know that Ridge High School is a very challenging high school. There's no doubt your student feels that. We know that as a counseling staff, the faculty knows that as well. And the colleges recognize that our students are very well prepared for the curriculum that they're asking the students to complete. And so the student's transcript is served by the school profile of Ridge High School. The second component that colleges use to answer whether or not a student can do the work is standardized testing. Now, I'm sure you've heard that this has been a very unusual year for the class of 2021, where previously there were roughly 1,000 colleges in the country who allowed students to apply test optional. And so those colleges had adopted a policy where they feel that they don't need standardized test scores to determine whether or not a student will be successful in their first year of college. But this year, we've seen nearly all colleges move to a test optional allowance. So students are being allowed in this year's senior class to apply with or without test scores. So that does not necessarily mean that all of those colleges believe in a test optional policy, but they're allowing it as a practice due to the coronavirus's impact on testing that's been available for students worldwide. The colleges that do not require test scores are located on a website called fairtest.org. And I know this will be discussed a little bit later. So there are many fabulous colleges that don't require any test scores on any year. And that number is only increasing every year, with this year as the exception where the majority of the schools have moved there. So, with regards to what will colleges be asking for the class of 2022, the current juniors, it's really too soon to say right now if they're going to be looking for test scores because we're in the middle of an admissions cycle and we haven't seen those decisions yet come out for the class of 2021. There are some colleges who went ahead and announced that they're going to allow a test optional policy for 2 or 3 years. So they're going to run it as a pilot to see how does it go if we really do remove testing from our application process. whereas other schools have adopted it for this year at this time, and then we'll have to wait and see what does the spring testing look like, and the summer, and then of course the fall of next year, which is when the class of 2021 would, or excuse me, 2022 would be applying. So those two numbers, the GPA and the test scores, create what's called an academic profile, and colleges use that academic profile to help determine, can a student do the work at this particular institution? When you take the academic profile and you put it in the context of Ridge High School, that is what Naviance shows you. So Naviance is going to show you the statistical admissions for Ridge High School students who've gone before, and if they were accepted, denied, or waitlisted to any particular college in the country. So Naviance is not a crystal ball. Colleges don't want to hear, well, on Naviance, our student would have been admitted, because what Naviance can't account for is real-time admissions, what's going on in the current cycle. But we certainly do use Naviance to help a student understand, is a college a reach, target, or safety for me based on my academic preparation? So then that brings me to the second question that a college asks, which is not as objective, but much more subjective. And that's, how is the student going to contribute to campus? How has this student spent their free time? And the best indicator of that is going to be the activity listing that colleges allow students to report on the application, and also the activities resume. So in this instance, colleges will value different types of activities in different ways, but it really is a myth that a college is looking for a well-rounded student, because what colleges want is to create a well-rounded student body. So they don't need every student to play a sport or play an instrument, but they want students to be committed to what they do pursue. So when a college is reviewing a student's activities, they're looking for 5 characteristics, not necessarily what do you do, but rather how do you do it? So the first one is commitment. Have you shown a 3 or 4 year commitment to a particular activity after the school day is over, whether it's in school or out of school? Or did you start something in elementary or middle school that you have continued strongly through your high school years? So that would show commitment. So that's number 1. The second thing colleges look at is leadership. They would much rather see a student be a leader in 2 or 3 activities rather than be a member in many activities. So they're not looking for breadth, they're actually looking more for depth. So students should be pursuing interests outside of the school day, whether in school or out of school, that really reflect their interests, where they want to be committed and even step forward and be involved. Which brings me to the third characteristic, which is responsibility. Colleges want to know, what is the activity and what do you do? They're also going to be looking for your passion and your initiative. And so that would round out those 5 characteristics when they evaluate your activity resume or your activity list on the application, because they want to see, is there something that you're particularly good at? And then do you go out and make it happen? So maybe you have a love for science and you're studying animal science and you're really going deep into being a veterinarian, but you also volunteer at an animal shelter. Or maybe you're a musician and then you also play in a quartet that visits senior citizen homes. So they're looking for your passions, and then how do you take those passions and extend them beyond what may already be available to you? So that's the second question, and that's what they're going to be looking at. The third question really comes down to character. The colleges want to know, would I want to live with this kid? Would I want my son or daughter to live with this kid? Would this student be a good roommate, right? So they're looking for those personal qualities. What kind of person are you? And they're going to glean that information from your letters of recommendation, primarily the counselor letter, because the teacher letters are really going to be focusing on you as a student in the classroom. But the counselor letter is going to talk about your strengths, your personal growth, maybe if you had some challenges, maybe you had some successes, right? But how you managed and navigated your high school career, what your background is. And then also your personal essay will give the colleges a sense of what your character is, what your values are, what your strongest personality traits are, what's important to you. So the story you choose to tell them in the college essay will be important for them to understand, who are you as a person? So those are the 3 questions when they open up a file that they're going to be looking at. Now, every college is going to put a different amount of weight on each of those factors. Some schools, oftentimes the large public schools, they kind of stay within the numbers. They look at those objective quantitative numbers like the GPA, the test scores, the amount of rigor that you take. Whereas smaller schools, the private schools, often look at you more holistically to understand, is there a story here? What is your story? What are your strengths? What have been your experiences? And so something that you'll want to listen for is the word holistic review, because there are many large schools that will tell you they do a holistic review. And so they are considering all of those factors that I just mentioned. Then there's this other category that's really like an other, because we can't predict in any given year at any particular school how much these different factors might tip an admissions decision. And so these are going to be things like legacy, right? So if a student is applying to a college that their parents graduated from, or maybe their grandparents, how does the college view you as a legacy, right? We know it's not going to hurt you, but the question is, how much does it help you? Well, the best way for a parent to find that out is to contact your alumni office to ask, how does the admissions office view legacy in the event my child applies? The second is demonstrated interest. Some colleges are going to track your demonstrated interest. They're going to ask you to register when you visit on campus or attend a virtual information session. They're going to look to see if maybe you attended a summer program on their campus. If the admission officer went to a college fair or led an event at Ridge High School or in our area, did you join? Did you participate? So demonstrated interest. It can sometimes be quantified and actually be counted in the admissions process. And then in other instances, they might track your interest, even if they don't quantify it, but the interest you show them determines the interest they show you. So you might learn about different programs and opportunities if you're following a college admissions page on social media that you otherwise wouldn't know. So it's important to know that demonstrated interest, when it's quantified, it's an easy get. And it's a terrible miss if you don't take advantage of a school that you know does track interest. Another way to show interest might be an interview. So there are, few large schools that interview. Most of the schools that do offer interviews tend to be smaller and private schools. So if a college offers an interview, you want to take advantage of that, because that's another way to demonstrate interest. Okay. Then there are things like special talents. So you may have a talent that college wants. So for example, an athletic recruit. So maybe they're looking to, keep a certain athletic program going. And so your athletic talent recruits you. And so that's going to help you in the admissions process. Maybe you're a singer and the singer for the national anthem is graduating and they know they don't have anyone else in the pipeline. I've heard colleges say that they've said, you need to get us to someone who can sing the national anthem, because that's something else that we're looking for. So that's another idea of a special talent. Then it could be a major. Perhaps there is an agenda that's come down from the board of trustees, and the president to admission saying, we want to grow or build this particular major. So you need to go out and find the students who want to major in that field so we can develop that department or keep it going or grow it in a new direction. So a lot of times the college admission officer may not tell you that specifically, but if you're reading the journals and the information about the colleges on their websites, and you see that they're opening up new departments and programs, or they're building new facilities, that's another way to find out, okay, well, that's what they value because that's where they're putting their money. So again, that can be another tip factor in terms of what's viewed for admissions. Then you have things like diversity, right? So diversity could be geographical diversity, it could be racial diversity, it could be social economic diversity, it could be gender. Right now, there's a huge push for colleges to recruit students for STEM fields that are women as well as underrepresented. And underrepresented often means based on race or even economic status. So that's another thing that can be looked at. In that same regard, colleges may say we want to increase the number of first-generation students on campus. And so if that is a goal of the institution and you're a first-generation application, then that is something that would help you through that process. And so these other factors can oftentimes account for when you are looking at Naviance and you're looking at a scattergram, everybody loves to say, well, here's an outlier. How did they get in, right? And so a lot of times how they get in might be one of these things I just said. So sometimes your counselor may know instinctively, sometimes they may know based on past experiences, sometimes the colleges have been very direct. right? So these other factors are at play, and they are kind of an undercurrent to the admissions process. We can't predict when or how, but it's good to be aware of them. And it's always good to ask your counselor if that's something that's involved. Okay. So those are the different pieces of the college application file. And again, these are the different parts that students have been building and working towards since they started high school. And then we are here to continue to give you advice on maybe where you have strengths and how to help shape those strengths further, or maybe you have some weaknesses and gaps, and we can help coach you to kind of bring you along in those areas as well.
Thank you. That was so helpful. We're actually going to stay with you for our next question.
Okay.
Still kind of on the theme of college admissions, but taking a look at college admissions during the COVID times. So talking about demonstrating interest without being able to visit in person. What are they looking for with activities, volunteering, and how will deferrals or gap years for previous applicants impact admissions for the class of 2022?
Mrs. Trainer, these are all great questions. And if I had a crystal ball, I might be sitting somewhere else tonight and not on this YouTube video, because these are all things that right now, I think every senior, parent of a senior, high school counselor, teacher, even the admission officers themselves, as they're beginning to read, are wondering what is going to happen with the current class of 2021 because of the pandemic, right? And so for us to kind of speculate on where this will fall out to the class of 2022, the current juniors, it's a little bit early for us to say that because we are in the middle of an admissions cycle. And so early decision and early action application decisions are going to be coming out in the next week, the earliest, right? So next week is a very busy week for early decision, and then even into January, February. So we will all get a glimpse, and the colleges will be sending us information to kind of let us know what went on in the application pool in this early round. And then of course, when we get to April, we'll have a better sense to see how did the entire application season play out. And then when we get back in the fall for next year with the current juniors who will then be seniors, we'll have those data points in front of us. And it really is important to try to drill down into the data as much as you can. So for the current juniors, as I said earlier, in terms of demonstrating interest. So we know that, last year, when you were a spring break as sophomores through the summer, you couldn't really get onto college campuses to do information sessions and tours, even through this fall. So a lot of colleges have shifted to a virtual model, and they're enjoying that because they're able to reach more students literally all around the world, as opposed to being limited to where their travel budgets can send them. So the virtual model, while nothing replaces an in-person visit for a student and to see the other students on campus, right now the virtual model is something that I definitely encourage all juniors to be taking advantage of, because colleges are still tracking. Did you sign up for a virtual information session from our website? Did you sign up for a virtual tour? Some colleges are offering specific virtual information sessions on academic programs. They're offering conversations with current students. So all of those things are being offered, and some of the schools are tracking that. In addition, I know they're going to talk about it later, that there's also national and local organizations that are hosting virtual events where students can get that information. So for right now, getting on campus, most campuses are closed. Even the campuses that are open may not have students. So the shift to virtual is something that we encourage the current juniors to take advantage of. I think the second thing to focus on is going to be the testing. My best advice right now to the class of 2022 is you need to proceed as if it was a normal testing year. There are not many students who really should have been testing in the fall of their junior year. So the students who should be testing in the fall of junior year, it's a very small group. They tend to fall into three categories. Either they're taking the most rigorous classes in the school and they have the highest marks. So they've already completed all the curriculum that's going to be on the standardized tests. And so they're well positioned based on their PSAT score from sophomore year to likely hit their score in that first semester. And again, we're talking about 4, 5, maybe 10% of the class would fall into that category. Then you have the category of a recruited athlete. Well, right now the recruiting athlete timeline has been shifted, right? So it used to be the contact period was September 1st for juniors. A lot of college sports, NCAA has pushed back the contact period to January 1st. So that need to have a test score, well, again, there were no tests to really take. from the spring to this fall. So that group of students, that Division I athlete, not a large group, they didn't have the opportunity to test. But again, the timeline has been changed. And then the third group, who maybe was going to try to test in the fall of their junior year, are those students that I work with who go to service academies. Because anyone who's applying to West Point, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, their process starts earlier. Their application process opens up in January of junior year. So they're going to be trying to get into those test scores in the fall of junior year. And those really are the only three groups that would have been affected by the current coronavirus affecting spring, summer, and then this fall. So the majority of juniors should really be in a good position coming out of the winter break. You have your PSAT scores. You have an indicator if you've seen what you would have gotten on an ACT, to pick one, do your test prep, and then again, testing in the spring of your junior year with the summer months available, and then into the fall as needed. So I don't anticipate, hopefully if things go well, we don't know, but I'm not saying that that timeline is going to stay firm, but I don't anticipate right now that current juniors should feel that they were derailed because of what's happened to the earlier testing. So I would kind of continue with the normal plan that I know they'll talk about later in this process. The other thing I want to talk about is activities. The colleges understand, and they have spoken to us and said, we understand that students, maybe have had changes in their summer plans, maybe some of their commitments and their involvement, maybe they were positioned for different leadership and those programs were canceled. If it really turns out to be significant in your activity resume or in your file, your counselor will guide you whether or not you need to answer the COVID-19 question that was added to the common application this year in response to the pandemic, as well as whether or not you should put it into additional information, or even if your counselor should mention it. So they know that a lot of activities have been disrupted, seasons have been canceled, festivals, theater performances. And again, your counselor can work with you on how to communicate that to the colleges, but they're not going to be holding that against the students. So those are kind of like the three hot button questions I think juniors might be worried about. I can't visit, so how do I demonstrate? My activities were disrupted, and what about testing? So I would move forward with those three, as I've said, and then we just kind of need to hold tight and see what happens with the decisions that roll out for the class of 2021. We'll all be reading our emails and the newsletters that come out, and then we'll give that information to the class once we have it.
All right, thank you, Ms. Miraview. I do see a live question that just came through. If we could do a quick follow-up. In terms of demonstrated interest on social media, is there any preference that a student should take in terms of Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or do they all get tracked?
So I think that the colleges, so the colleges are meeting the students where the students live, and that's social media. The colleges realize that students are not checking their emails as much as we all as adults would like them to be checking their emails. And so the colleges are going onto the social media platforms that the students are using. I would say that there's not necessarily a preference by the colleges. So if the student has social media and wants to follow them on any one of those platforms that you mentioned, that would be appropriate. If your child does not have social media at all, right? And you, as a family, or your child has decided, I don't want to have social media, it's not like that's something that they're going to be held as a disadvantage for. Okay, it's just a way that you can get information. Something you could consider is just creating an account where maybe you're not posting anything, but that's an account where you can at least be following, again, to find out information about the school and notices and information that they might be sharing. When colleges send those emails to students, it is good for the students to start checking their emails, because colleges have technology programs where they can actually track whether or not a student opened the email. So there have been instances where I've sat on different advisory boards where the universities have opened up their application system and shown the advisory board, this is what we're tracking. We sent out this many emails. We sent this many emails to this one particular student. We track interest. They didn't demonstrate interest. They didn't open our emails. And so they were deferred or they were waitlisted. And when the phone call came in, why were they not, accepted? And we can reference these types of data points. So the colleges do track if you open an email, they can indicate that. And it's something that would go into their system that they would have access to. And then again, with social media, I'm not going to say you have to open an account if it's something that you don't feel comfortable with. If you want to do it solely to follow admission pages, then that might be a decision you and your parents say is okay. Otherwise, there's certainly other ways to get the information. There are blogs. The colleges host blogs. Some of these blogs are incredibly helpful. And if you go onto the universities that you're looking at, a lot of blogs are going to give you key information about admissions at that particular school. But then there are also some blogs that just give great college admissions information. Georgia Tech has a fantastic blog. Their dean is an incredible writer. He is funny, he is relevant. He gives you great insights, but he also keeps it real. So whether or not you're interested in Georgia Tech, you might want to follow his blog just to kind of get a vibe on what's happening in college admissions. The other thing I would say about social media is that it's very important that if you do have a social media account, whether or not you're following an admissions officer or not, but any kind of social media that you have to understand the colleges can see it and can find it, even when you think that you've had it hidden. So you want to take this time now to go through your social media, look at your settings, and make sure there's nothing posted on that you would be embarrassed. And the rule of thumb is, if you don't want your grandparents to see it, or not even add, if you don't want your school counselor to see it, then you should probably remove what you have posted. So you are held responsible for what you post and also the types of things that people post on your social media. So the comments that they may make, because you are the company that you keep. And because the admission officers are getting younger, right? I know I'm getting older, they're getting younger, they use social media. So maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago, college admission officers, admission offices in general, student workers and admission officers, they weren't looking at social media, but that percentage has increased. So admission officers are going to take the time to look something up. And if they see something concerning, colleges want to admit you, do not give them a reason to deny you. So clean up your social media, clean up whatever your names are on social media, and then decide if that's something you want to follow them on. Regardless if you follow them, definitely make sure your social media is appropriate and you would not be embarrassed if your grandparent or school counselor saw what was there.
I just also want to add to that answer that we also want to be careful that once a student is admitted and they're on things like admitted students pages and blogs that have to do with meeting other admitted students, that they're taking into consideration the fact that those are all also monitored by the college admissions offices, and it's very important that they keep everything appropriate on those sites as well. I think there's that tendency to feel like once you've been admitted and you're just communicating with other people, that maybe that isn't part of the process, but just to clarify that is still something that is monitored by the college admissions office, and we certainly don't want to give them any reason to rescind an offer that has been extended.
And to piggyback on what Ms. Cahill just said, if you followed the local news over the summer, you may be aware that there was a local private school where I believe 2 or 3 students lost their athletic scholarships and admission offers to some pretty selective colleges because of things that they posted on their social media that were then forwarded to the admissions and made public, and they did lose their spots. So these are real stories, these are real situations, and what Mrs. Cahill said is 100% accurate, because it does happen, and it happened as recently as last year in our local area.
All right, thank you very much. So just a reminder for our families, we are taking questions live at juniorplanning@bernardsboe.com. Any questions that we receive, we are posting, for anyone who's just joining us, we are posting to our website on a Q&A that we'll publish online by the end of this week. Everything that we've said so far in the past 39 minutes, we will also write up these answers in our Q&A. So don't worry, if you're at home taking notes and trying to remember what we're saying, we will make sure that that these answers are provided to you. So with no further ado, a question that we do have, Ms. Hughes, I'll pitch it over to you. Do colleges use a weighted or an unweighted GPA, and how will it impact my child if a college uses an unweighted GPA?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. Something to know is that Ridge does provide a weighted GPA on the transcript and does not disclose the unweighted GPA anywhere to colleges, to students, or anything like that. So, kind of the impact of that is a lot of colleges end up recalculating the GPA when they receive applications. A lot of them have their own formulas or their own things that they do to calculate that, just so that they can have a more standardized number when they're looking at everything. So it's important to know, though, that that shouldn't have a negative impact. It's not meant to penalize anyone who has a strong GPA or anything like that. It's simply to just have a standardized measure. So we do use that weighted GPA, but you know, it's important to keep in mind too that even those schools that are going to recalculate and standardize the scores, it will be evident to them based on your transcript, the level of difficulty your classes had and how well you did in them. So just because they might be recalculating doesn't mean they won't recognize that. So that's kind of how it happens at Ridge, and then what happens once that GPA gets over to the college.
All right, thank you. Our next question is a question that we receive often. We hear it often in the counseling department. The question asks, what should my child be doing now regarding college planning, and what support does Ridge offer to help with this process? I'm excited to answer this question because it's probably my favorite question to get, only because it just highlights the amount of support that's available to you and your student. So just quickly, I'm going to highlight some of the things that we've already done this year. So in mid-November, the counselors met with all of our juniors during a mandatory post-secondary presentation where we introduced this process and we introduced our post-secondary handbook. The handbook is available on the counseling website. It's also available in your student's counselor's Google Classroom. It has a lot of information and it has links to videos where you can watch and you can hear us explain some of the topics that are being discussed. So for your students who took the PSAT in October, they should have received an email from College Board that should have a code to access their PSAT scores. We're going to talk a little bit more about PSAT scores a little bit later in this Q&A. So that brings us to where we are right now. We are at this evening presentation, and we're excited that we're here today. And then when we return from winter break, we're going to be starting to meet with our students to begin senior year schedule. It always amazes me how quickly that comes up in the school year, but we will start that process in mid to late January. In addition, counselors are going to be meeting individually with every single junior student. We like to call these meetings our junior conferences. So during this meeting, we meet individually, like I said, with every junior, where we talk about their post-secondary pathway. We answer any questions that they have. We provide feedback. We can give instructions on next steps. So we work really closely with every single student. At the end of that year, we do not say good luck to you, let us know how it works out. We continue working with every single student and family when we come back to school in September of their senior year. Every senior will have a senior meeting with their counselor to talk about their own pathway. We also have senior parent night, we have financial aid night. So again, the takeaway here is that we are here to help you. So if your student is struggling, doesn't know where to begin in this process, not sure where to do, have them reach out to their counselor. Also in the handbook, we have a calendar that kind of details like where students should be every month during the next year and a half. So you can access that. But again, if you're unsure, have them reach out to us.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Trainer. So we do have a question here about finding the right fit. So we've heard a lot about the admissions process so far and the applicant portfolio, but how about Mrs. McGivney? How about we pitch this one to you? How do I begin the college search process and create my college list?
So if you're sitting at home tonight thinking, oh my gosh, where am I going to start? How am I going to do this? There are a few different places that you can start. So the first is that there are a few things you want to consider. You want to consider what your interests are, if you have any future goals or careers in mind. You want to think about costs, of course. You want to think about how far away you want to live from home. You want to think about the size of the school you want to go to, what kind of clubs or activities they have. If you want to play a sport when you're in college. Those are all the things that you can start thinking about right now. And like I mentioned before, Naviance is going to be really helpful in this area also. There are many different ways you can search for colleges in Naviance. The one that I would direct you to probably at this point is doing the super match. And in the super match, you would answer all the questions for some of the topics that I just talked about. So how far away do you want to live from home? You know, what size of school do you want to go to? So you can plug all that information in and it'll generate a list of colleges for you. And then also in Naviance, you can search for colleges individually.
Okay, awesome. We're going to actually stay with you, Ms. McGivney, for the next question related to campus visits. So how do students get information about college campuses when they can't visit in person?
So Ms. Merview touched on this a little bit earlier. It is difficult, a little bit more difficult now to visit colleges, and it looks a little bit different than it did maybe 2 years ago or last year. So there are still a few things that you can do. One is to check out the college's website directly to see if they're running any virtual tours or any info sessions. At Ridge, we're also hosting individual colleges through rep visits, and you can find more information about that on Naviance. We are also really lucky to live in a state where there's a wide range of different colleges. So you have Rutgers, which is a big state school, and then we have other smaller liberal arts schools. So even a drive through the campus might be a good way just to get a feel of what the campus might look like. Especially Rutgers, it's a big school, so you can drive through almost the whole thing and get an idea of what going to a big school might be like.
All right. So standardized testing, specifically the PSAT, we mentioned that we would be discussing this. So Ms. Wu, when do PSAT scores get returned? How do students access them? And a question that we received is, how do PSAT scores translate into SAT scores?
So right now, students who took the PSAT in the fall actually just had scores released this week. And most of them should have gotten an email at the address that they used to register for the PSAT. And in that email, they'll receive information on how to create their College Board account, to log on and get the scores. There is a phone number, which I'll just put out there in case you know that you haven't gotten this access code, that you can call to get the information to log in for College Board and to get those PSAT scores. It's 866-433-7728. And it's definitely important for students who did take the PSAT to log in, to look at that score report that is in their account, because these scores provide students with information on how they'll perform on the SAT. So it really breaks down the types of questions that they were asked, what they got wrong, and what the correct answers are. It gives them a lot of information that's geared towards them specifically and how they can practice and strengthen their skills in certain areas to prepare for the SAT. In terms of standardized testing, just because we're talking about it too, they can also go on the ACT website to take a test to kind of see how they do there. And we do encourage students to get experience with both the SAT and the ACT to see what they're comfortable with. And then we also do have a program called Method Test Prep through Naviance, which all students have access to, and they can practice, basically get practice tests for the ACT and the SAT and get information and lessons on the material that's covered, go over practice quizzes, and there's also full-length tests just to give them more exposure. And if they are the type of person who wants to kind of do some extra prep on their own, that is a program that they can utilize.
So Ms. Wu, just as a quick follow-up, we did receive a question in the email about free test prep. And so you mentioned Method Test Prep. Now, how do students and parents access Method Test Prep?
So Method Test Prep is connected to their, the student's Naviance account, which they can log into. And then they would click on the Method Test Prep link and they can utilize the same username and password that they use for Naviance to be able to access Method Test Prep.
Thank you, Ms. Wu. That's really helpful. Our next question is probably our most popular question, and Ms. Sweet is going to guide us through this question. The question asks, what is the difference between the SAT and the ACT? How do I decide which test to take, and when should I start testing?
Hi. I was just going to say that this is probably the most frequently asked question that I get every year regarding the differences between the two tests. So the main differences between the SAT and ACT relate to the structure, the timing, and the scoring of the test. So the SAT scores students based on 2 categories, English and math. And then the ACT scores students based on 4 categories, the English, reading, math, and science. These tests are scaled differently. So the SATs are scored on a 1600 scale, where the ACTs are scored on a scale of 36. To answer the question on which test should I decide to take, the answer is that it depends. There really is no one indicator that will predict which test will be right for your student. Students will benefit from taking a full-length test in both the ACT and SATs to determine which test they prefer or score higher on. Generally speaking, I know we've touched base earlier on this, we recommend that students begin testing in the winter of their junior year and continue through the spring, summer, and fall of the senior year. It's important for students to consider their own schedule and when they're the busiest in developing their standardized testing plan. As we continue through these uncertain times due to the coronavirus, testing may be limited. Students should also consider having a backup plan in case of unexpected cancellations. In addition, many schools have adapted new testing policies, and many schools are going test optional like we already discussed. Those schools can be found on fairtest.org. Make sure that you're checking the testing agency and college websites for all the up-to-date information regarding standardized testing.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sweet. Let's see, just looking at the questions here. Ms. Wu, let's give it back to you. What is Naviance and how can students and parents obtain their registration information?
So many of you are probably wondering, we keep throwing Naviance out there. And for those of you who haven't had a son or daughter, go through the college process, you're probably sitting there thinking, what is this Naviance thing that they keep talking about? So it's a program that we offer students, and they can get a ton of information on there like we shared. When students log into this program, they have access to tools that help them personalize and simplify the college and career planning process. Like we mentioned before, there's the career interest inventory that students took. They can explore career clusters and start to kind of compile their college list, either through looking at the majors that are related to their careers and the colleges that offer those majors, or just doing a college search on Naviance as well. There's learning assessments that students can do to learn more about their own learning style. We also have a lot of college data that's housed on there. So I know Ms. Merview had talked about academic information like the GPA and test scores, and Ridge houses information for Ridge students so they can look at those scatograms and see, the type of numbers that for students who applied and were admitted and denied to these schools, and kind of see how that fits when they're doing the college search and whether a school is a safety, a target, or a reach. We also have information on there related to scholarships and summer programs. The name is a little bit deceiving. It's actually called the scholarship list. So if you go on the scholarship list, you can see scholarships that are available. Some do start, right now where students can apply for things. There are scholarships that are listed as we get them. So it's always changing. And when a deadline's passed, it's pulled off and we update that information as we get it. We also have summer programs or programs that are available just to juniors that are on there. So it's definitely a resource to use to see what's out there. And again, that's called the scholarship list. If students or families don't know what their access code is for Naviance, they can just reach out to the counseling department secretaries, and you can get those email addresses on the counseling department website, or we'll be posting it on this Q&A as well. So you can, email those people directly to get set up with Naviance if you can't get in or have forgotten your username or password.
Great, thank you. I think we're going to shift our the Q&A to discussing some common terms that we use in the college application process. So Ms. Sweet, can you talk a little bit about the different application admission policies?
Yeah, so in the junior handbook that we had referenced a bunch of times, there's a detailed glossary of terms that will be helpful in the college admissions process. We get a lot of questions about the differences between the admissions policies. So I just want to take a moment to highlight some of the more popular ones. And like I said, the glossary of terms in the student handbook will define all of the admission policies that are out there. So the first one that I want to take a minute to define is the early decision policy. Through this policy, students can apply early, usually in November, and they will receive a decision typically in December. Early decision is a binding contract, so it's an agreement where students must attend if they are admitted, and at that time they will withdraw all their other applications. Because this is a commitment, students can only apply to one school through early decision. This decision should be carefully considered with the assistance of your families and school counselor. Early action is another early notification policy. Students will apply early, usually in December, and receive a decision typically in December or January. If accepted, the student is not obligated to attend. There's no binding contract here. This is just an early admissions policy. Regular decision is our traditional deadline. Students will apply by a specified date, typically in January, and they receive a decision within a reasonable and clearly stated period of time that the colleges will put out there. You can apply to any school under this policy without restriction. Rolling admissions. Colleges with rolling admissions will evaluate applications as they are received versus waiting to evaluate all applications at a hard deadline date. So schools will continue to evaluate application until they've filled their slots for the upcoming year. So think of this on about a rolling basis as applications are coming in. And then priority deadline. This is a deadline that should be utilized when available. For full consideration in whatever the student is applying for, admission, housing, financial aid, priority or preferred deadlines are specific to the individual institution. So those are just the highlighted policies that most students will utilize in the process.
All right, great, thank you. So staying on the topic of our glossary of terms here, Ms. Cahill, we sometimes receive this question: does early decision or early acceptance generate more or less scrutiny of the applicant? And then second to that, what are the pros and cons of early decision and early acceptance applications?
Okay, so colleges do have varying policies on whether it would be advantageous to apply in an early action format or like a priority deadline, for example. Counselors do assist our students based on the schools on their list, their academic profile, as well as what their first choices are to determine whether or not they should apply early. Early decision, as Ms. Sweet explained, is a binding policy, so it does tend to give students a slight edge in the process since the student is making a firm commitment to attend if they're accepted. However, that edge is generally not enough to move a student from one that would be inadmissible to one that would become admissible. It's just a slight bump that maybe would take a student from being compared to other students with similar profiles and potentially waitlisted. Early decision is not an appropriate path for every student, however, and it's a decision that should be made after considering a few factors, including, of course, financial need, any trends in the student's transcript, and also, of course, the need to withdraw other pending applications if the student is accepted under an early decision policy. We recommend that students consult with their counselor before they apply early decision, and also if they have questions about whether to apply early action or whether to wait until the regular decision deadline.
Thank you. We're going to stay with you, Ms. Cahill, to talk about our next topic, which is financial aid. We often get a lot of questions related to this topic. So can you talk a little bit about when families need to complete the FAFSA and when if they should fill it out, if they won't qualify for need-based aid?
Sure. So the FAFSA, or the free application for federal student aid, opens October 1st of the student's senior year, and it's based upon data from 2 years prior tax information. So that allows students to apply in the fall of their senior year for aid rather than having to wait until January. So for current juniors, students will be applying for a PIN number and begin completing the FAFSA on October 1st of 2021, and they'll be providing financial information that's based upon tax information from 2019. We recommend that all families complete the FAFSA so that they're qualified to receive merit-based aid and other institutional aid. In addition, filing a FAFSA by the college's deadline is important in the event of a drastic change in financial situation. Obviously, these are times when we've realized that we can have a change that we were not expecting that has, obviously global implications. So if the FAFSA was previously filed and there's been a change in circumstances, families can file an amended FAFSA and the financial aid office can work with the student to provide an updated financial aid award package even mid-year.
All right, thank you very much. So moving on to letters of recommendation. Ms. Wu, how about we'll ask you, when should students ask teachers for letters of recommendation? And we have a question here, can you better explain how the parent brag sheet is used in recommendation letters, including special circumstances?
This is a great question, and it's something that we will also cover with students during the junior conference that was mentioned before. So we do encourage students to reach out to teachers whom they feel really know them well in the spring to write the letter of recommendation for them. And so during the junior conference, we'll talk about, who they're thinking about getting letters from and give them specific instructions about what they need to give to teachers to send letters of recommendation at the beginning of their senior year. For other letters that go besides teacher letters, counselors do write letters, as mentioned previously, for each student that goes to the admissions office, which outlines, basically the character of a student. So that senior packet, which includes the parent brag sheet that you mentioned, is something that we utilize when we're writing those letters of recommendations to kind of enhance the information, to review information that a student might want to be included in their letter. If there are special circumstances that have happened throughout high school, whether it's mentioned in the parent brag sheet or the senior self-description sheet, we'll talk about that with our students during their senior year when we sit down with them to meet and just kind of discuss information that they want to include in the letter from us and, their application in general. We don't include information, just as a side note, specifically on accommodations. If that's mentioned, that's something that we have a permission to disclose form that would need to be signed off on. And again, that's something that, we'll discuss further during the junior conference and also senior year with each student.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wu. Ms. Cahill, I'm going to ask you a topic that's probably your favorite topic to discuss, which is the essay. So the question that we received was, any early suggestions on what to write about or not write about for essays? For instance, should they stay away from writing about how COVID has affected students? Any thoughts on the personal essay?
Mrs. Trainer knows I have lots of thoughts on the personal essay. So do you feel like it is easier to provide advice on topics to avoid rather than it is how easy it is to provide advice on what topics students should write about when applying? So for example, topics that are simply a reiteration of a student's resume should be avoided. Whether a student chooses to share personal information about a hardship or an illness or something very specific to them is something that we want to discuss specifically with them. It really does depend on how they present that information. So for example, providing information to show growth or progress or highlight that a student is resilient may be a good reason to share this information. However, utilizing it as an excuse or providing information that could raise a concern as to whether a student is prepared for college study is a reason to consider not sharing or perhaps just changing the way in which the student is providing that information. Students are encouraged to consult with their counselor about these types of topics to discuss the way in which they're sharing that information. So as we mentioned before, I believe Ms. Merv, you mentioned this before, there is a COVID-related question on many applications, including the common application itself this year. Students have asked us about whether they should respond to this question on the application, and we got some really good guidance from a representative from Tulane, the NACAC conference. The NACAC conference is the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, and during the conference this year, they suggested that students ask themselves the following 5 questions. Experiences different from others? Am I aware of my privileges? Am I complaining or explaining? Am I being specific? Am I being repetitive? So if students have done this and they're still unsure of whether to provide a response, or they'd like us to take a look at the response that they did, they're really encouraged to discuss this choice about whether to respond to the COVID-related question with their school counselor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cahill. That's super helpful. So a few questions here. We're a little bit over our time, but just to address the questions that are still coming in. When we have a chance after this concludes by the end of this week, like I mentioned earlier, for those of you who are just logging in right now and joining us, we will be publishing the Q&A. And so we'll post the answers to these questions. Even if we didn't get to your specific question tonight, we were definitely able to answer a lot. So we'll post the answers on our website by the end of this week. To reference a couple questions that came in before we wrap up tonight, let's just reiterate here, Ms. Muirview, I'll pass it to you. Can you talk a bit about, we have a question that's come in just asking about that parent brag sheet. So maybe for some of our families that this is their first junior going through the process, what are the documents? We hear talk of a senior packet part A and part B. Can you walk us through what to expect after that junior conference?
Right, so after the junior conference this spring, so in the second semester, the junior student will be asked to complete the senior packet part A. So that's going to include some pretty thoughtful questions that the student is going to answer about themselves. And just keep in mind, it's only being shared with your school counselor. So, we're looking for you to, give us as much reflection as you can on different experiences you've had, areas where you've grown. The questions are, I think they're pretty fantastic. Like, they're very specific, so they guide you in that way. And again, this is something that we'll refer to when we're considering what to write your letter about. So you can also write us a note, I'm sharing this with you, but I don't want this in my letter. Or, you can send us an email separately. And like, was said earlier, you will have a senior meeting with us. So just because you put in the packet doesn't mean it's going to show up, but it might be good information for us to know. So the first part is the student questions. Then there is a parent set of questions. There's not as many parent questions, but they're broader questions. So we're really interested to know, how have you seen your child grow? Where have they changed throughout high school? Are there any particular things we should be aware of if we're not already aware of them? And please don't think that just because we've been with you for 4 years, that either A, we know all of those facts, or that we don't want to give you the time and space to reflect on them and say, I know you've been there with us for this every step of the way, but this is how I'm feeling. I've had a lot of parents share with me that they find it's helpful to look at the questions, as a whole document, and then write them as they feel. Sometimes they get up and they just write some of their ideas, so they keep it open, as a document, or if you are, doing it in hand paper, but mostly like, typing, but it's something that you can be reflecting on and ongoing, because we do realize, and this is your child, this is your most precious commodity. And, there's a lot of reflection of, things that they may have gone through earlier, things you want to celebrate about them, that you want to share with us. So please don't ever think that you're telling us too much. There really isn't too much. The more information you can share, the more examples and anecdotes you can provide, especially when we ask for the student and for the parent to describe the student. When you give us those characteristics, it's great if you can anchor them with examples. We have our own examples, right? Things we've observed in your child, things we know from teachers we've spoken to, but please, feel like you can really write to us and let us know. Some parents feel it's helpful to even think that, what would you write in your child's letter? And so you look at the question and don't feel that you're just limited to that question, especially at the end. Like, if you want to say, like, this is something, that I just want to write, so really use it as an opportunity, to celebrate, to process, to reflect for both the student and the parent. There's also an activity resume. So I had mentioned that earlier in my segment, And so if you go onto the counseling website, this is something that students could start now. So, you know, you're heading into a break. If there's not a lot of travel plans going on, you could easily jump onto the counseling website. We have a section for college documents, college planning. And if you look in there, we have a sample activity resumes posted and tips that are in there as well. So the activity resume is a part of the senior packet. It's the third part of the packet, but it's something that you can actually start creating now, even an underclassman, you know, so living documents, a working draft. And then the fourth part for part A is going to be the list of colleges. So it's a preliminary list. We want to know, you know, what you're kind of thinking about, you know, what are some of your interests, you know, locations and things like that. So when you do turn it into us, we have an idea of what you're considering. When you get to senior year in September, that's when we're going to be looking for part B. And so part B is really giving us that finalized list. So things change over the summer, academic profiles come into view, preferences may change, visits may inform your decisions. So we're looking for a final list, although of course, you know, kids still change that list, you know, and tweaking it here and there in the early fall. We're looking for a finalized resume. So giving you that opportunity to update anything you did over the summer. And then we're looking for a transcript release form. So that's a signed document that we need to have on file, and we keep it in your official file, and that allows us to send your school documents in the college application process. That gives us the permission to do so. So what's great about how the counseling website is maintained is that if you were to log on to the counseling website now and you were to go under presentations, you can go back and see the last 2 or 3 years worth of presentations because they're stored there. So you can always go back and preview what, you know, we'll be talking to you about for senior year. You can go under the college planning tab and look at the college documents. You can take a look at what the senior packet looked like for this year's class. Like I said, there's other things that are there as well. We do update everything. So just always make sure you check back to make sure that it matches, but those resources are available to you. And I would say our website is very robust. And so everything is housed there. There's a lot of links, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of outside resources, and it'll help support you with that.
All right, so we are a bit over our time at this point. So we are so thankful for the many of you, over 200 at one point, who joined us this evening. We were happy to do this. And like I mentioned several times earlier, we will take the Q&A, any questions that we weren't able to get to. We got to a lot this evening, but those that still remain in our email that are just still coming in now, we will work on publishing the answers to those questions, and then we'll post the Q&A on our website by the end of this week. So you can, just as Ms. Merriview said, keep an eye on the website and we'll post the Q&A. And with that, we thank you for your time and have a great evening.